This time it is Ghost Ship by Ogawa Mimei. It is a slightly scary children's story about what happened to three fishermen.
Ghost ship. I saw a shiny object off the coast. The water in the ocean was black and blue, and there was a tremendous amount of water. And since this area was close to the North Pole, it was always cold. The shiny object was getting closer and closer to the shore. It was an iceberg, and it was becoming more and more clearly visible. An iceberg. The iceberg was quite large, in some places shining as sharply as a spiny mountain, and in other places it was so wide and flat that several people could run across it. And in the water of the ocean, it was hard to tell how deep the roots extended. All icebergs are made of this kind of crystalline ice. They drift in and out of the ocean depending on the tide. We saw icebergs almost every day in the ocean around here. Sometimes there would be these large chunks of drifting ice floating in the air, and in the distance, as far as the eye could see, was a glorious landscape. A lonely sunset broke through the clouds and reflected off the icebergs. It was reflected in the eyes of those who stood on the shore and gazed at it far and wide. At one point, it was like an iceberg ship with a steam engine, running at a frightening speed in front of us, but there was no shadow of life on this glistening white ice floe. But after a while, as the iceberg came closer to the shore, people saw a small, black object falling on the ice. Could it be a blackbird? People who were standing on the shore looking at the sea said, "Maybe it's not a bird. Maybe it's a hippopotamus. Maybe it's a fossil." But when I got closer, I saw that it was a big bear. The bear seemed to be struggling to get to land somehow. The bear must have gone out to play on the iceberg, where the top of the seawater was frozen white. When the top of the seawater froze white, the bear must have gone out to play on the iceberg. We all knew that if the bear came on land, we would be in trouble. They were afraid the bears would come on land and run wild. They were afraid of bears coming on land and running amok. If a bear comes this way, we're in trouble. So they brought their guns and spears. But by that time, the iceberg had drifted again, this time heading offshore instead of coming close to land. We were all relieved that the bear had not crossed the river, but we felt sorry for him, wondering how far he would be swept away. There were no more icebergs. The sea was calm up there, so we decided to go fishing. So one day, the three fishermen boarded a boat and set sail for Oki. One day, the three fishermen boarded a boat and set sail for the offshore area. The three men approached an island off the coast. There was no one living on the island. There was a small bay on the island and fish were often found in the bay. Fishermen often stopped by the island and took time to fish. When they caught fish, their catch was sometimes amazing. The three of them took a boat out to the middle of the bay to see what was going on, and found a lot of seafood in it. We caught it. We caught a lot. The three of them stood up bravely. The three of them stood up bravely. They lowered the net and pulled it up, and sure enough, they caught more fish than they had ever caught before. If we put them all in the boat, they would get in the way of us going further out to sea to do our work, so we decided to leave the fish we caught up on the beach on the island and take them with us on our way home. Of the three of us, one remained on the island. When they returned in the evening, he tried to signal them by lighting a fire. The second man remained on the empty island and watched, shouting, As A and C bravely left the bay in the direction of the sea. "Come back soon," B shouted to his two companions. "Oh, we'll miss you. We'll be back soon." They both laughed and slowly left. It was a peaceful night. They laughed and slowly moved away from each other. Since they were children, they had always thought that there was an ocean on the tatami, so they were not afraid of this rough sea. Just as the sun was about to set, a windstorm appeared. It was unexpected and sudden. Suddenly, the waves became very high and began to roar. B was worried about the safety of his two friends who had gone out to sea. "Please come back to this island safely as soon as possible," he prayed. As he prayed, B built a fire and tried to put up a sign in the dark night. In the meantime, the wind and rain changed and the blazing fire was blown out many times. Each time, however, B eagerly renewed the fire. However, the long-awaited ship did not return. Where would they have run off to in this storm? B was very worried. In the meantime, the horrible night had cleared up. Huge waves were rising in the sky as far as the eye could see. There was not a shadow of a ship in sight. B was left alone on a small deserted island. He spent the day standing on the shore waiting for the ship to return. But the ship had been wrecked in the storm, and there was no sign of it. Even though it was almost dark that day, it was 3 days later, and B was already weak and emaciated. As he stood on the shore, staring out to sea, he saw a ship carrying his familiar companions cut through the waves and enter the middle of the bay. Kao and Hei were both safe, and I could clearly see them moving in the boat. "Oi!" he shouted to the sea, raising his hands high in the air. Then it looked like he was shouting from there as well, raising his hands high. However, I did not hear his voice from that moment on. The shadow of the incoming sun shone brightly on the waves. The shadows of the incoming sun shone brightly on the waves, and the faces of the two people on the boat turned red. "I'm so glad you survived and came back. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you didn't die and came back." B rejoiced with hot tears streaming down his face. Soon, the ship was closing in on them. "Hey!" shouted both A and C, raising their hands. Both A and C seemed to respond to the shout, but as soon as they thought they heard the sound of the ship crossing in front of them, they disappeared like a cloud of smoke. B was astonished. "It's a ghost ship," he said. He threw his body on the sand and began to cry. During the night, he had various hallucinations in his tired head. He continued to have nightmares throughout the night, and when it became light again, his eyes were bloodshot and agitated. It was late afternoon that day. He looked up and saw the familiar shape of a ship. Moreover, he saw the same that he had seen yesterday. He saw a ghost ship coming this way. For a moment, his heart leapt at the thought, but the next moment, his whole body was filled with a creeping sense of dread. But in the next moment, he was overcome with disgust. Otsu began to go crazy. Meanwhile, the ship was cutting through the waves, getting closer and closer to the island. B pulled out a pistol from his waistband. B took the pistol out of his waistband and fired it at the captain of the ship. However, the fire did not go out, probably because it was not a ghost ship. When the ship reached the shore, the two men hurried ashore. "Oh, you're out of your mind," they both said, restraining the rampaging. BB's head went crazy. On the night of the storm, the boat carrying them was blown away by the storm on the land over there. Waiting for the wave to calm down, they went to the island to pick up their friends. They put the crazy bee on the boat and headed for land. Then they warmly looked after their poor friend, and gradually the madness returned to normal and was eventually cured. The three remained close friends for a long time after that. This story still remains in Takada port. The uninhabited islet still pokes its head out in the middle of the black and blue waves.